On August 19th, 1888, Angela West was in the South Trench with a shovel in both hands when the church bell began to strike, slow, uneven, the signal for death or fire. She froze with caliche dust on her palms and listened through the ringing, counting each blow. She set the shovel against the cottonwood fence, wiped her face with her sleeve, and looked toward town. Even from 3 miles out, she could see the air above Red Clay Crossing waver in the heat. When she rode in later, the thermometer nailed to the depot read 108 degrees in the shade, and the shade itself felt mean and thin. Heat shimmered above the railbed like clear fire. Tar bled from wagon wheels. Horses stood with their heads low, nostrils white with salt, while men talked too loudly because quiet made room for fear. At Blevins Mercantile, she found 3 men telling the same story over each other, each certain his version was clean truth. A rider had come in hard from the South Trail just before noon, they said. Hat gone, shirt dark with somebody else's blood. He had made it to the hitching post, slid from the saddle, and vomited in the dust before he could speak. Then came the sound. Everyone repeated the same way. Hooves in a tight, deliberate rhythm, too disciplined for drovers and too many for one family. From the street itself, and from mouths that would not stop shaking, Angela pieced together the rest. The Doolin gang had entered in a line, coats dappled with silver road grit, rifle barrels wrapped in cloth against glare. Behind them, tied upright to a saddle like freight, was Deputy Harland, already dead, jaw slack, neck purple where the rope had cinched. They had cut him loose and hanged him from Red Clay's own hitching post without hurry, as if hanging law was no more remarkable than watering horses. The tallest of them, black hat, scar over the lip, had read terms in a voice clear enough to carry up and down the street. 2 weeks. Protection money in cash, cartridges and feed. Failed to pay. And Red Clay Crossing burns from stockyards to church bell. By the time Angela reached the hitching post, Harlan still swung in the heat. She stood still long enough to taste the air, habit older than Arizona, dry sage, hot iron, no rain yet. Trouble first, weather later, she told herself as she always did before panic could root. Name what is true. True, her South Trench was 1 foot too shallow where the bank sloped toward the goat pen. True. 2 of the buried water barrels needed fresh pitch on the lids. True. Men in town would call this overwork until they needed it. Angela had come to this territory 9 years earlier with a husband, a wagon, and 2 words of English she trusted: flour and water. She was from a mountain borderland east of Vienna and south of maps that stayed settled for long. In winter there, snow could swallow a doorway by nightfall. In spring, armed men tested fences the way wolves tested lambing sheds. Nobody survived by speeches. You survived by stacking wood in August, hiding grain in 2 places, keeping one path visible and one path secret. Her mother taught her the household rules. Boil water before storms, because dead livestock always ended up upstream. Wrap seed in oilcloth and hang it from rafters where flood rats could not chew through. Sleep with boots by the bed, laces open. Her grandfather taught the harder ones. Never trust one gate. Never store all powder in one barn. If raiders ask where the good horse is, point to the second best and limp while you do it. Strength, he would tell her in the old tongue, tapping his chest with 2 fingers, is not shouting. Strength is having tomorrow hidden where thieves will not think to look. He died in a winter that cracked apple trees in half. She still heard his cough when cold wind moved through plank seams. In Arizona, she buried him only in memory, but she kept his rules like scripture. After her husband, Thomas West, died of a lung fever during the railroad grading season, folks expected her to sell the homestead and go where widows went, back east, into somebody's kitchen, into dependence. Instead, she bought 2 used spades, a crate of lime, and 30 feet of discarded rail ties. She learned soil by feel, clay that held, sand that lied, hard pan that looked harmless until rain skated over it and took fences, chickens, and sleeping children in one brown wall. Red Clay Crossing laughed as she dug. It was a boom town with fresh money and short memory. Cattle profits came in and were spent by Saturday. Polished revolvers, imported whiskey, brass spittoons, velvet for women who would leave by winter. Men called her Old Country Angela with a smile that pretended to be kind. They praised her rye bread, her pickled beets, the way she could doctor a colicky mule. Then they smirked when she warned that the dry wash west of town could become a river by moonrise. Rain? In August, they'd say. You planning for Noah next? She answered in plain words because plain words had kept her alive where pretty ones did not. Storm does not ask what month, she would say. It only falls. By the time the bell sounded that August noon, she had already lined her root cellar with scavenged stone, mortared in lime and ash to keep walls from slumping. She had 6 water barrels buried under 3 inches of packed earth and brush, each marked by a thumb-sized notch in nearby fence posts. No one else noticed. She had mapped every wash between her farm and town on feed sack scraps, with charcoal arrows showing likely flow if monsoon burst over the western ridges. She had cut channels in her own fields, 2 feet wide and 18 inches deep, to move floodwater away from her door and toward low pasture she could afford to lose. Preparation made her look strange in years of luck. Luck had made everyone else look brave. That evening, the church filled with dust, sweat, and outrage. Ranch bosses stood in front pews as if rank carried into God's house. The sheriff, Eli Pritchard, broad-shouldered and sunburnt, kept one hand on his belt and the other on a paper where somebody had copied the gang's demands. Widow women sat tight-lipped in back. Children were shooed outside, then crept under windows to listen anyway. Angela waited until shouting thinned. "Move families to church cellar," she said. Her accent roughened the vowels, but every word landed. Not for one night. For all nights until deadline passes. Split food and cartridges into caches, 3 places each household. One in town, one out, one you tell no one. Fortified ditch line by feedlots, not Main Street. Main Street is wide. Horses win there. A rancher laughed from the aisle. You hear that? We're taking war advice from pickle jars. More laughter. Angela kept her eyes on the sheriff. Your rooftops are silhouettes, she said. At dusk, they can pick you off one by one. Ditch lanes are narrow. Mud can stop a charge. We make choke points. Sheriff Pritchard lifted his chin, offended, before he answered. We'll meet devils in the open, Mrs. West. Men where they can be seen. Town needs courage, not burrows. Courage is not standing where enemy asks, Angela said. The meeting ended with applause for the sheriff's plan. Riflemen on rooftops, sandbags around the bank, sentries at both street ends, and a volunteer list full of men eager to be watched, being fearless. Next morning, the gang's scout captain rode to her place with 2 others, slow and smiling. He was younger than she expected, with pale eyes and a rawhide cuff braided too fancy for honest work. He looked at her barn, her stacked cordwood, her trenches, and nodded like a man appraising livestock. Heard you got spare horses, he said. Sheriff says town requisitions for defense. Those horses haul water, Angela answered. If storm comes, people need water more than parade. The scout grinned at his companions. Hear that? She won't help. He dismounted, pulled a branding iron from his saddlebag, already red from a charcoal pan one rider had carried, and pressed it hard to her barn door. Pine resin hissed. Smoke rose sharp and bitter. When he stepped back, a crude blackened sea scarred the wood. Coward, he said cheerfully. Saves us asking later. They rode off laughing. By supper, the story reached every porch and counter she passed in town. By dark, people repeated it back to her as settled fact. She had refused out of fear. Angela stared at the branded door until the last ember died. Shame came hot and brief. Then she folded it into usefulness. If they wanted coward, she would give them coward. The week that followed, she made a show of small surrender. In town, she kept her gaze low and spoke softly. She sold 2 mules to Harkerfield for $12 each, $4 below fair value, where enough men would witness the loss and carry the tale that she was liquidating before flight. She bought only lamp wicks, vinegar, and coarse salt, all things a woman might buy before running. She let Mrs. Cobb at the laundry overhear that she might go east before next moon. She did not correct anyone. At home, the real work began. She started with measurements. The lane behind the feedlots ran 140 yards from the old tannery wall to the south corral gate, narrowing to 11 feet at the choke between Granger's hay barn and the abandoned wheelwright shed. Mounted men could enter 2 abreast there, no more. In dry conditions, hard clay held. In rain, topsoil turned to glue. Angela paid the Mexican ditch crew in silver and food, 75 cents a man for 2 night shifts, plus beans, flour, and coffee, to deepen the lateral channel that fed irrigation troughs, but only along segments hidden by stacked hay bales. She marked grades with twine and pegs, dropping the bed 4 inches over 30 feet, so released water would run fast into the main lane instead of soaking her own plots. They cut spill slots every 12 yards, each 6 inches wide, concealed under loose planks. She recruited people red clay ignored because they did not fit its mirror of heroism. Thomas and Luis, shepherd brothers barely 16, quick on foot and silent in brush. Mrs. Cobb, who knew every family's habits because every shirt passed through her hands. Mr. Halberd, a one-armed Union veteran who could still sight a rifle better than boys with 2 good hands and no discipline. 4 rail laborers laid off after the grade reached north. 2 laundresses. 3 boys from the livery who could handle frightened horses. No oaths, no speeches, just tasks. You hold lantern until I say, she told Luis, handing him a shuttered tin lamp with 1 panel drilled in a star pattern only volunteers would recognize. If wrong signal, nobody moves. To Halberd, you train firing by pairs. First shooter takes reins, second takes shoulder. No chest unless no choice. We stop charge first. To ditch crew foreman Mateo, when I say gate, you pull pin and run uphill. Water does killing, not us. At dusk, they rolled 2 broken wagon axles into position behind feed sacks, ready to drop into the lane as barricades. They soaked straw bundles in lantern oil and tucked them in false alley mouths, where a spark could make a wall of flame and smoke, not to burn men alive, but to blind and turn them. Angela chalked small symbols low on fence rails. Circle, slash, 2 dots, codes for safe passage, ammunition cache, medic station. In daylight, they looked like children's marks. Sheriff Pritchard confronted her outside the post office on the 9th day, voice loud enough to gather a crowd. I hear you're stirring panic behind my back, he said. Digging ditches in town, telling women to hide bread. I tell women to live, Angela replied. You organize 1 more man without my authority. I'll jail you for incitement. A ranch hand spat near her boots. If blood comes, it's because cowards invite wolves. Angela did not flinch. She dipped her head like a chastened widow and stepped aside as if his words had landed deep. The faces around them eased, satisfied by what they took for submission. That was useful too. That night she climbed the small rise above her north pasture and watched the western mountains darken under a lid of cloud, thick and green-black at the belly, lit from within by far-off heat lightning. The wind shifted, carrying the copper smell she trusted more than forecasts and boasts. Rain was coming late and hard. Outlaws were coming on schedule, and Red Clay Crossing, drunk on appearances, still thought the fight would be won where everyone could see it. Angela stayed on the rise until the lightning faded behind the ridge, counting the seconds between flash and sound, even though the thunder never reached her. Dry lightning, heat still trapped low. She turned toward the house and began making tomorrow's list in her head before she reached the porch. At the table, she spread 3 things under the lamp: her feed-sack wash map, a carpenter's pencil worn to a nub, and the page torn from Thomas's old freight ledger, where she kept measurements in a tight, slanted hand. She wrote, lane grade check at first light, gate pin grease, all 4, test spill slots with 1 barrel each, move powder cache number 2 to Stone Pit, drill lantern signals with boys, no talking. Then she added 1 more line and pressed hard enough to tear the paper. Do not answer insults. Before dawn, she and Mateo's men were in the feedlot lane with a plumb bob made from a nail and twine. The lane looked flat to the eye. It was not. A half-inch rise where Granger's wagon had worn ruts could stall a whole diverted flow if she left it. She had them cut and scraped by lantern until the line held true from tannery wall to corral gate. She measured with her boots, heel to toe, then checked against a marked pole so she would not fool herself with tired legs. At spill slot 3, the drop was too steep. Water there would undercut the plank cover and announce itself before she wanted it. They packed the lip with clay and tamped in gravel from the railbed, then laid a false top of manure and straw so it looked untouched. By sunrise, her skirts were stiff with mud and ditch water. She walked the whole run again, crouching to test the gate pins. They were lengths of wagon leaf spring, filed narrow and drilled for rawhide loops. Pull loops hard enough, gate drops. Too much rust, and men die with a gate half open. Grease again, she told Thomas. We did last night, he said. Again. He did not argue. At her barn, Mr. Halbert had 6 volunteers lined up behind stacked feed sacks, teaching them to fire by rhythm instead of panic. He made them call targets before touching trigger. Reins, crack, shoulder, crack, lantern, crack. The youngest livery boy flinched after each shot and blinked powder smoke from both eyes. Halbert cuffed him lightly with his good hand. Keep your eyes open, son. Closed eyes are prayers, not aiming. Angela set clay jugs on fence posts at changing heights and distances, 15 yards, 20, 30, then had Luis run a horse past at a controlled trot, while shooters tracked but did not fire. The lesson was lead and restraint. Not every moving thing needed a bullet. Panic wasted cartridges faster than bad aim. By midday, her coward's farm looked like disorder to anyone passing. Wagons left at odd angles, hay bales shifted for no apparent reason, planks leaning where no repair was underway. Hidden in that mess were fields of fire, fallback routes, and 2 medic corners with boiled cloth, lye soap, and splints cut from broom handles. She split food the way she had told the town to split fear. 3 caches, no single failure fatal. 1 cache under church root bins with Reverend Pike's reluctant permission. 1 in Mateo's tool shed beyond the ditch line. 1 buried in lime-sealed crocks beneath her goat pen, where nobody but her would think to dig. Powder got the same treatment. Never all in one dry place. Never where lanterns hung. At dusk, she ran signal drill. 1 shutter flash, hold. 2 flashes, move to first cover. 3, pull gate and fall back to chalked slash. They practiced in silence because silence would be the first thing gunfire stole. The project grew not because people suddenly trusted her, but because work traveled through kitchens faster than pride traveled through saloons. Mrs. Cobb brought 2 laundresses and a ledger of whose babies needed milk if men were pinned down. Mateo recruited cousins from the North Cut, men Red Clay called temporary and relied on for every ditch that kept cattle alive. Widow Hensley offered her backlot for a hidden wagon block because she had buried 2 sons and did not care whose feelings were hurt by practical plans. By the 4th evening, Angela had a rotating watch of 23, only 7 of them men who would have been asked by the sheriff to stand rooftop. The rest were people who had learned that nobody was coming to save them unless they saved each other first. Red Clay noticed. Red Clay mocked. At first it was laughter from porch rails when she passed. Then it became organized sport. Somebody nailed a board outside the Lucky Strike Saloon with a charcoal C painted on it, and a jar beneath labeled Coward Fund. Men dropped pennies in and bowed theatrically when she crossed the street. Ranch boys called, "Hide us, Mrs. West," and ducked behind water troughs, wheezing with laughter at their own joke. At Sunday service, Reverend Pike preached from Joshua about strong walls and strong men, and every third head turned toward Angela, though he did not say her name. Afterward, Mrs. Pike pressed her lips and told Angela, "Faith, not fear, should guide a town. Faith built ark with measurements," Angela said. Mrs. Pike blinked like she had been slapped. At Blevins Mercantile, credit that had always been, "Next week is fine," suddenly required cash up front. Blevins kept his eyes on the scale while he said it. "New policy. Only for me?" Angela asked. He hesitated long enough to answer yes without saying it. Children took up what adults started. Someone had taught them to chant "coward" in sing-song. They did it outside her gate at sunset until Thomas ran them off with a switch, not striking, just cracking air. Next morning she found eggs broken against the burned letter on her barn, yolk crusted yellow over the black scar. Sheriff Pritchard added law to contempt. He posted notice on the telegraph pole. No unauthorized excavation within town limits. Violators fined. He then rode out to her place with 2 deputies and read it aloud, as if she could not read English. "You dig 1 more cut in public right-of-way. I seize your tools," he said. "These cuts are on Hensley and Mateo lots with permission," Angela answered, holding signed scraps she had taken care to collect. "Not right-of-way. He did not take the papers. You want to play clerk games, play with someone else." By evening, she had a $5 citation tucked under her door latch. $5 was 2 weeks of flour. She paid it in silver the next morning, coin by coin on his desk, while 3 men watched and smirked. She thanked him for his time. It cost her more pride than money, which was exactly why she did it. Let him think she bent. The council met 2 nights later in the back room of the bank. Angela arrived with a rolled map and was stopped at the door by Councilman Ritter, who smelled of bay rum and fresh authority. "Private deliberation," he said. "Property holders only." "I hold property," she replied. He smiled thinly. "Primary holders." She understood the word he would not use. Men. Inside, voices rose through the plank wall. She heard rooftop sightlines, public show, no panic measures, women and foreigners spreading alarm. She stood long enough to hear her own category spoken like a disease, then went home and moved 2 more water barrels under moonlight. Casual cruelty hardened into social quarantine. Women who once traded yeast starters with her crossed street rather than speak. The blacksmith bumped her shoulder on purpose at the well and did not apologize. A ranch hand spat directly on her porch boards while she watched. When she stepped forward, he grinned, waiting for the outburst that would make her the mad foreign widow in every retelling. She fetched a bucket and washed the spit away in silence. That was her answer every time. Repair, recalibrate, continue. When chalk symbols were scrubbed from fence rails, She marked them again lower, near ground where only careful eyes would notice. When someone loosened the rawhide loop on Gate 2, she replaced all loops with twisted baling wire and hid spare pins in a flour sack behind the smokehouse. When oil bundles were discovered and mocked as witch nests, she relocated them to loft corners above eye level and wrapped each in burlap dusted with chaff. Insults had rhythm. Work had rhythm too. She chose the one that kept people alive. At night, when anger throbbed behind her ribs, she repeated her grandfather's rule in the old tongue until her breath slowed. If they watch your face, hide your hands. Hands do the real work. The signs arrived in layers, each one small enough for a careless town to ignore. On the first morning, harvester ants began carrying eggs up the sides of their mounds, white grains moving like spilled rice. In drought, they stayed deep. They climbed only when water was coming hard enough to drown the lower chambers. On the second, swallows skimmed low over the stock pond at dawn, and then vanished by noon, all at once, as if a hand had swept them off the sky. By evening, the wind shifted southeast, warm at ground level, but cool above. Cross-current that made her cottonwood leaves show pale undersides all day. She checked the depot barometer while pretending to read freight notices. The needle had dropped since yesterday, not dramatic but steady. She touched the glass twice, as if that could make others see what she saw. At the livery, men watched dust devils dance and called it good dry weather. Angela crouched and pressed fingers into lane clay, where shade held. Top crust cracked, but below it the soil was tacky, waiting. First heavy burst would seal the surface and send sheet flow running fast. Perfect for her channels, deadly for horses at speed. Natural signs were only half. Human signs came too. She found fresh horse sign where no ranch route crossed. 3 riders cutting through mesquite above the west wash at dawn. They had wrapped hooves in sacking for quiet. One strip tore loose on a thorn, leaving jute fibers and a smear of axle grease that smelled faintly of clove tobacco. Same sweet scent she remembered from the scout captain's cuff when he burned her barn. 2 nights later, Luis reported a glint on the south ridge at twilight. Spyglass lens, then nothing. Thomas heard 2 short whistle notes from the rail cut after moonrise, answered by one from near town pumps. Not coyotes, not birds. Signal. Angela took these to Sheriff Pritchard in person. Scouts are mapping approach, she said, and someone in town answers them. He leaned back in his chair, boots on rung, and looked amused. Or boys whistled at rabbits. Rabbits don't carry spyglass. Mrs. West, every shadow in this county is not your gang. She set the torn jute on his desk. He did not touch it. By the end of that day, the town had a new interpretation. Angela was inventing omens to justify her digging. Men pointed to clouds that built over the mountains and dissolved before reaching town. See, they said, your storm keeps quitting. They called Virge coward rain and laughed at their own weather joke until their mouths shone with whiskey spit. On deadline eve -2, a copper taste sat on the back of Angela's tongue from noon onward. Her hair lifted in little static whispers when she pulled her dress over her shoulders. In late afternoon, heat lightning walked the cloud base without thunder, and the cattle in Harker's lot bunched tight, rolling eyes white. Horses in the livery stamped and refused feed. Storm nerves, someone said. They smell wolves. Then why no wind? Another answered, and they both shrugged as if contradiction were comfort. Angela did not argue anymore. She moved. She sent Mrs. Cobb with quiet instructions. Tonight, extra bread to cellar. Tell mothers it is for heat, not fear. She had Mateo check every gate pin once more and place pry bars at marked posts. Halberd redistributed cartridges by tin cup count, 15 per shooter, reserve in 2 separate sacks, no hero volleys. She had Luis and Thomas wet the wheel hubs of the two barricade wagons so the rims would swell and roll true when dropped. After dark, she climbed the rise again. The western sky looked bruised from horizon to zenith. Cloud belly lit green-black in pulses. This time, thunder arrived, very far, like furniture dragged across an upstairs floor. Below her, red clay crossing glimmered with ordinary lamplight. Piano from the Lucky Strike drifted thin and jaunty across the fields. Men still planned to be seen being brave on rooftops tomorrow. Men still believed danger would announce itself in the shape they expected. Angela listened until she heard, beneath piano and insects, one faint hoofbeat from the direction of Town Road, then another, deliberate, unhurried. A lone rider moved in darkness where decent folk rode by day. She turned toward the barn, toward the burned black sea on the door, and let the town keep believing what it needed to believe for one more night. She did not go inside. Angela took the back of the barn instead, moving through shadow with her skirt gathered in one fist so it would not brush dry weeds. The hoofbeats came again from the town road. One horse shod, careful at first and then less careful, once it cleared the last house line. Whoever rode believed darkness was cover enough. By the time she reached the mesquite cut above the west wash, she could see him. Narrow shoulders, clerk's seat, not a rancher's. The moon gave him a pale cuff and the shine of spectacles when he turned his head. Owen Bell, the banker's clerk, riding hard with a satchel strapped crosswise under his arm. Angela dropped to a crouch and followed along the wash lip where brittle grass hid sound. A quarter-mile out, Bell slowed and gave a low whistle. 2 short notes. From the dark below, one note answered. 3 riders separated from the wash shadows as if the earth had spat them out. One was the scout captain with the braided rawhide cuff. Even in moonlight, she knew his grin. "You're late, Quill boy," he said. Bell swung down, hands shaking as he unbuckled the satchel. "Had to wait till Ritter left his office. It's all there. Streets, rooftops, who keeps powder where, who can shoot, who can." The scout took the ledger, thumbed pages, and laughed once under his breath. "Sheriff sets men where they can be seen. Kind of him." Angela's fingers tightened around the handle of the skinning knife at her belt, then loosened. Knife was for rope and goats, not 3 rifles in open wash. She watched instead. "What about West?" Bell asked. "The widow. Folks say she's—" "Coward," the scout said. "We branded her ourselves. She'll run." The men chuckled. Above them, the first wind struck, hot and sudden, carrying dust and the metallic bite of rain still miles off. Lightning walked the ridge behind the riders, white branches without thunder. The scout shoved the ledger inside his coat. "Tell Ritter payment stands. 3 nights. We collect on September 2nd. A thunderclap cracked so hard, the horses jumped sideways. Bell's gelding reared. Bell lost his stirrup and hit the ground on his shoulder with a cry. His satchel slid loose, spilling one folded sheet into the wash mud. The outlaws wheeled away instantly, vanishing into brush with the ledger and their laughter. Bell scrambled up, swore, found his horse, and rode back toward town, clutching his arm. Angela waited until hoofbeats thinned, then slid down the bank and picked the fallen paper out of mud. It was a copy page from the bank ledger, names, addresses, annotations in Bell's neat hand. Pritchard rooftop placements, Blevins rear powder cask, West Farm, probable stored grain, 2 to 3 horses, no resistance expected. She folded the page into her bodice and went home under a sky now flashing every 10 seconds. On August 30th, 1888, at 11:47 p.m., 2 nights before the September 2nd collection deadline, the rain hit Red Clay Crossing. Not gentle rain, not the teasing spit that darkened dust and passed. A monsoon wall burst over the western ridge and came down in hot sheets so dense the nearest fence vanished. In the first 20 minutes, the depot gauge took an inch. In an hour, it overflowed and had to be emptied by hand twice more. Angela stood in her doorway and counted. 1,000, 2, 1,003, thunder, storm overhead. For 2 hours and 36 minutes, water hammered roofs, churned the dry wash into a brown current, and ran every false flat street true downhill. Main Street, broad and proud, became exactly what she had warned, a channel. Sheriff Pritchard's rooftop men were already posted because he had ordered visible readiness each night till deadline. By midnight, their sandbags sagged and burst. Lime mortar between the mercantile bricks bled milky streams. Ladders floated away from walls. Rifles wrapped in canvas still took water through the actions. At the bank corner, Councilman Ritter shouted orders from under an awning while the awning poles snapped one by one. He tried to move Silver from the front office to the vault, but the new vault door swelled in its frame and jammed half shut. Water found the threshold seam and ran in anyway, lifting ledger books until they fanned open like drowned birds. The Lucky Strike's big painted sign tore loose and scythed into the street. A lightning strike hit the hitching rail outside the saloon, then jumped to the overhang. Fire took in 2 places at once, roof shingles and whiskey crates by the side door. Men ran buckets that filled as fast as they threw, but wind drove sparks across to Cobb Laundry's line shed. At 12:31 a.m., Deputy Nels Avery tried to cross from the hotel roof to the telegraph office on a plank bridge they had laid at dusk for showy maneuvering. The plank shifted on wet brick. He went down between buildings, hit the rain barrel edge, and vanished into the alley torrent before anyone got a hand on him. They found him at dawn against the tannery fence, fingers still hooked in a drain grate. At 12:54, Harker's livery doors blew inward when panicked horses slammed them from inside. 8 horses burst into the flooded lane, iron shoes striking sparks on submerged stone. Caleb Harker ran to cut a tangled lead, took one kick to the chest, and folded in the water like a coat dropped from a peg. By the time they dragged him clear, his mouth was full of mud. At 1:10, Reverend Pike's niece, Ruthie, who had been sleeping in the church annex because her mother was sick, woke to smoke from the line she'd fire and ran for the side stair. The old annex awning, waterlogged and burning at one edge, collapsed across the yard route. Smoke swallowed the annex door before anyone could reach her. By 2:23, the rain eased to a hard drizzle. By 3, it stopped, and Red Clay Crossing looked like a town after artillery. Mud to the ankles in some streets, to the knee where wagon ruts had become trenches. 2 outbuildings gone, 1 saloon wall blackened, feed spoiled, flour soaked through, chicken coops overturned, privies flooded into wells. Sheriff Pritchard stood at dawn in front of the telegraph office with rainwater still dripping from his hat brim, trying to give orders no one could follow because no one could hear over crying, coughing, and the crack of timbers being pried apart. His proud rooftop plan had not fired a shot. It had drowned men in place. Angela rode in at first light with 2 mules and a wagon of dry sacks, boiled cloth and vinegar. She went first to the churchyard, where bodies had been laid under tarps. She uncovered each face just long enough to name them and cover them again. No speeches. Names. By noon on August 31st, 1 day remained until the September 2nd deadline, and the temperature climbed back to 103 despite soaked ground. Steam lifted from mud in greasy curls. Flies came in black clouds. People who had mocked trenches now dug with bare hands to clear doorways. Children carried broken shingles like kindling. Women tore petticoats into bandages until there was nothing white left in town. Every third person smelled of smoke, wet leather, and fear. The suffering was not only the dead, it was the arithmetic after. 43 families lost all or part of stored flour to floodwater. 6 wells tested foul by smell alone, latrine seep and dead chicken runoff. 3 milk cows broke legs in hidden washouts. Half the town's loose cartridges misfired because powder had clumped. Roof leaks turned sick rooms into swamps. Babies cried from heat rash and bad water. Old men who had laughed loudest now sat on crates staring at ruined feed, lips moving through numbers that would never balance. Mrs. Cobb worked with blistered hands beside the smoking ruin of her line shed, pinning wet shirts across fence rails because people still needed clean cloth for wounds. Mateo's cousin Isidro, who had spent 2 nights deepening Angela's hidden channels, now lay on a church pew with a beam splinter in his thigh because he had been ordered to shore up the bank awning when it gave way. He bit a belt while Angela cleaned the wound and asked twice whether he would lose the leg. Not today, she told him, though she was not sure. Reverend Pike moved through town like a ghost in wet boots, soot on his collar, asking each house if they had seen Ruthie or her doll dress. Nobody knew how to answer him without breaking. By afternoon, desperation sharpened into blame. Men shouted at each other over whose wagon blocked drainage, whose lantern started which fire, whose son had run when he should have stayed. Councilman Ritter, coat ruined and hair plastered flat, announced from the mercantile steps that emergency rations would be distributed by account standing, meaning those who owed the bank would wait. That lasted 5 minutes before women began shouting him down. The contrast was visible whether people admitted it or not. Angela's farm had standing water in the sacrificial pasture and mud in the lower pen, yes. But her house foundation held. Cellar stayed dry, and every buried barrel came up clean. Her volunteers had dry powder wrapped in oilcloth, mapped lanes that still worked, and food caches not yet touched by flood. Town had bravado and wreckage. Near sundown, a new cruelty arrived. 3 shots from the South Ridge, spaced slow, not aimed to hit but to announce presence. Then a rider appeared at distance where everyone could see and no one could catch him, black hat bright in the low sun. He dragged something behind his saddle for 30 yards before cutting it loose in plain sight and riding off. It was a scorched board with a fresh black C burned into it. The message was clear enough for children. The September 2nd protection deadline remained. Storm had only softened the town. Sheriff Pritchard tried to rally men for another rooftop watch that evening. 11 showed. 2 could not keep their footing on ladders from bruised ribs. 1 vomited from fever. No one clapped this time. His status, once iron and red clay, had gone soft as rain-soaked wood. Just after full dark, while Angela was at her table rewriting supply counts by lamplight, fists hit her door, 3 fast, 1 slow. She opened it to find Sheriff Pritchard bareheaded, mud to his thighs, Bell the banker's clerk half behind him with his left arm in a sling, and a girl of maybe 10 clutching Pritchard's sleeve. The girl was Ruthie Pike's cousin, Elsie, face streaked with ash and tears gone dry. Pritchard did not begin with rank. "We need help," he said. "Not request, not order. Need." Angela stepped aside at once. Inside. Bell flinched when he saw her, then looked at the floor. "Good. Let him." Pritchard set his hat on the table and spoke in a voice scraped raw. "Wells are bad on 3 blocks. Ammunition ruined. My men are hurt, and folks are talking about scattering before dawn. If they leave in pieces, Doolin picks them apart on the road." He swallowed. I should have listened. Elsie lifted her chin like she had practiced courage all day and failed none of it. "Mama says please," she whispered. "Please help us not die." Angela knelt to the girl's height. "You did right coming." She stood, turned to the shelf, and took down the folded, mud-stained ledger page from her bodice where she had tucked it to dry. She laid it in front of Pritchard. His eyes tracked the headings and went hard. "Inside map," she said. "Bell gave them this last night." Bell made a broken sound. "Ritter told me it was only inventories, only to spare the bank." "To spare yourself," Pritchard snapped. Angela raised one hand. Later for blame, now for living. She moved like she was back in storm season at 16, decisive, unornamented. "Sheriff, send runners, quiet runners, to every house. Families move to Church Cellar and Hensley Lot before midnight. No lamps in windows. Bell, you will write names of all who can carry, cook, bandage. Elsie, you stay with Mrs. West and eat bread while we work." She pulled a spare rifle from under the bed, checked the action, and set it on the table. Then she looked at Pritchard. "Tomorrow morning," she said, "you take this rifle to your office in front of witnesses and announce I surrender it. You call me frightened. Broken? Finished. You make sure word travels." He stared. "Why?" "Because they already believe it," Angela said. "And I need them to keep believing until they ride where we choose. No conditions. No apology demanded. No price. Only the plan and the work, and one more chance for a town that had almost drowned before the bullets even started." At sunup, Sheriff Pritchard did exactly as she told him. He stood on the telegraph office steps with Angela's rifle held across both palms, like a church offering, and said, loud enough for every ear in the street, "Mrs. West has surrendered her weapon and withdrawn from any defense activity. She admits panic clouded her judgment." Murmurs rolled through the mud-streaked crowd. Some looked relieved. Some smirked. Councilman Ritter, coat newly brushed as if polish could erase floodwater, nodded once in satisfaction. Angela stood 2 steps below the sheriff with her hands folded and her face emptied of argument. She did not look at Pritchard. She did not look at Ritter. She looked at the hitching post where Deputy Harland had swung and thought, "Watch their eyes. Hide your hands." When someone called, "Coward" finally learned. She lowered her gaze as if the word pierced. By noon, the rumor had done its work better than any telegraph line. At Blevins, men repeated, "She gave up her gun." At the livery, "Old Country's done digging." At the Lucky Strike's half-charred bar, "Doolin won't need to waste a cartridge on the widow." By sundown, 2 riders on the South Ridge watched town through glass, saw no obvious movement around Angela's place, and rode off hard. September 2nd came in white heat and ended under a bruised sky. Clouds piled over the western ridges all afternoon, dark-bellied, green-black underneath, the same color as old copper. The ground still held the storm's damage, tacky clay under a dry skin, ruts full of cracked mud that looked solid until weight found the wet beneath. Angela moved through the feedlot lanes one last time at dusk, touching each station as if taking attendance. Halberd in hayloft, left side, with 2 shooters and reserve cartridges. Mateo and Isidro by gate pins 1 and 2. Pry bars ready. Luis at lantern post, shutter closed, breathing too fast. Thomas with the livery boys at wagon barricades, horses already moved clear. Mrs. Cobb and Widow Hensley in the medic corner, kettles hot, cloth boiled, splints stacked. Children and elders in Church Cellar and Hensley Lot. No lamps in windows exactly as ordered. Sheriff Pritchard stood in the shadow of the tannery wall, hat low. 30 men with him. Fewer than his old rooftop boasts, better placed than his pride preferred. He met Angela's eyes once. "Your field," he said quietly. She nodded. "Keep your men low. Fire only on signal." The first hoofbeats came at full dusk, just as thunder began to roll in long, flat waves. The Doolin gang split exactly as she had predicted. One column peeled toward Main Street for the bank and mercantile, expecting frightened men and easy intimidation. The second, 9 riders led by the scout captain with the braided cuff, angled for Angela's farm and the feedlot cut, where they believed hidden grain and a defenseless widow waited. Louise lifted the shuttered lantern and gave one flash. Hold! Riders entered the lane at a fast trot, 2 abreast, cursing the narrow. The scout captain laughed when he saw the burned C on Angela's barn from a distance. 2 flashes. Move to first cover. Thunder cracked overhead. A fat drop hit dust, then another, then rain began. Hard, sudden, slanting. 3 flashes. Gate! Angela shouted. Mateo and Isidro yanked the rawhide loops. Steel pins tore free. Concealed gates dropped in the lateral channel with a thud. Water, held back in ditch, runs all day, rushed into spill slots and out into the lane in a brown sheet. Within seconds, the clay top broke under hooves. Horses went from striking sparks to sucking mud up to fetlocks, then knees. Now! Halbert barked from the loft. The first volley was disciplined and ugly in the right way. Shots at reins, at shoulders, at lantern hands. One outlaw's lamp spun from his grip and burst in mud with a hiss. Another pitched sideways when his horse's front legs folded. A third tried to wheel out and slammed into the wagon axle. Thomas dropped across the rear choke. The lane became noise and confusion. Horses screaming, men swearing blind in rain, gunfire cracking from angles the gang had not mapped. Angela fired once at a rider raising a shotgun toward the loft. Her bullet took his upper arm. The shotgun blasted harmlessly into the tannery wall. She fired again at another man's reins and watched leather snap. The horse reared, slid, and dumped him face first into slurry. At Main Street, the bank column hit resistance they had not expected. No rooftop silhouettes, only dark windows and crossfire from slit positions behind soaked feed sacks and brick corners. Pritchard's men shot from cover, not ego. 2 gang riders went down at the bank steps. The rest scattered toward the south lane, straight into the flooded choke where Angela's line held. The scout captain fought harder than most. He dismounted, used his horse as moving cover, and pushed through rain and mud with a revolver in each hand. He saw Angela between posts and grinned through blood on his lip. "Coward!" he shouted, firing. A round tore Angela's sleeve but missed flesh. Halbert's second shooter clipped the scout's thigh. He staggered, still upright, and tried to reach the side alley where a clean escape had existed yesterday, and now burned with oiled straw ignited by Thomas's match. Smoke rolled low, forcing him back. Pritchard closed from the left with 2 deputies. The scout swung toward him and slipped. Mud took his boots, and he went down hard enough to lose 1 revolver. Angela crossed in 3 strides, kicked the second gun out of reach, and planted her boot on his wrist. He looked up at her, rain washing grit down his face, and laughed once in disbelief. "You." "Me," she said. By the time the shooting stopped, 4 outlaws lay dead, 6 wounded, 3 fled into the storm dark without horses, and the rest were bound in rawhide at the tannery wall. Red Clay had losses too. 2 townsmen shot, 1 trampled, 1 with a broken jaw, but not slaughter. Then came the second danger, victory rage. Word spread fast that the scout captain was alive. Men flooded into the lane with rope and righteous fury, faces lit by lightning and lanterns, voices cracking on Harlan's name, on Avery's, on every grief the storm and gang had piled up. "String him up. Same hitching post. Let him taste it." Someone looped a rope before anyone gave lawful order. The scout spat blood and grinned at the crowd like he preferred a noose to a cell. Angela stepped between rope and prisoner. "Move," a rancher snarled. "He burned us. He burned your barn." "He hangs by law," she said. "Law?" another shouted. Where was law when Harlan swung? She did not raise her voice. If we become them tonight, then they still win tomorrow. Hans grabbed her shoulders to pull her aside. Pritchard shoved those hands off. "Stand down," he roared. "By territorial authority, prisoner goes to marshal alive." The crowd heaved, cursed, trembled at the edge. Then Mrs. Cobb lifted a blood-soaked bandage in one fist and yelled, "You got strength for rope, bring it to the wounded." That broke it. Not all at once, but enough. Angela pointed like a quartermaster on a battlefield. "You, water detail to churchyard. You carry that man, not by his arms, by the blanket. You boil every bucket before drinking. No exceptions." By midnight, her barn and the church basement were field hospitals. She opened every buried barrel she had hidden through years of ridicule. Clean water sloshed into kettles and mouths. She broke lime-sealed crocks of grain and beans. She sent bread from her own pantry to houses that had mocked her accent. She sent bandages to outlaws first if their bleeding was worst, because blood did not care about affiliation. "Boil 3 minutes after rolling," she told women at the church stove, holding up fingers to count. "Not warm, boil. Then cover. Do not dip dirty cup." She showed boys how to dry damp cartridges near coals, never over flame. She had men dig emergency latrine trenches downhill and far from wells, cursing while they dug and nodding when they understood why. At one table, she stitched a deputy's scalp while explaining to Elsie Pike, who held the basin steady, how to tell shock from simple fear. "Cold skin, fast pulse, eyes far away," Angela. "Lay flat. Keep warm. Small sips." Elsie nodded with fierce concentration, freckles stark against soot. Across the room, Bell the clerk sat with his sling and wrote names of injured as Angela dictated, tears dropping onto the page he did not bother to wipe away. Outside, expensive failures steamed in the rain, polished revolvers clogged with grit, ruined awnings, warped vault doors, sandbags split like rotten fruit. Inside, modest preparations held: a drilled signal, a greased pin, a hidden barrel, a woman who had spent 9 years being laughed at while she measured ditch grade by candlelight. At dawn, Red Clay Crossing was half-flooded, smoke-stained, and alive. The territorial marshal arrived by rail 2 days later, hard-eyed and impatient, with 4 deputies and iron enough for every captured outlaw. He took one look at the bound scout captain, at Pritchard's statements, at Bell's ledger page and Bell's shaking testimony, and asked for Councilman Ritter. Ritter tried to leave town before sunrise with 2 trunks and a story about relatives in Prescott. Tomas and Luis found him at the North Cut with 1 mule and no dignity. By noon he stood in irons beside the scout captain, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The public reckoning happened that evening in the church because no other building could hold the town and its shame. Every bench filled. Men stood in aisles. Women lined the back wall with infants and bandaged hands. The air smelled of wet wool, lamp oil, and fresh dug earth from new graves. Reverend Pike opened with prayer, voice breaking on Ruthie's name, then stepped aside without sermon. This was not a night for polished words. Sheriff Pritchard rose first. He had shaved, but the cut on his jaw was still stitched and angry red. "I made decisions that nearly cost this town everything," he said. "No flourish, no excuses. I chose display over defense. I dismissed warnings I should have heeded. I threatened citizens who were doing the work I should have organized." He looked straight at Angela where she stood near the side wall. "Mrs. West, I was wrong." Silence held for a beat, then 2, as people adjusted to hearing a man like him say that aloud. Then Mrs. Cobb stood from the second bench, apron still stained brown despite scrubbing. "Wrong is one thing," she said. "Cruel is another. We mocked her. We let children mock her. We spat at her door while she stored water we drank last night. A murmur of assent, ashamed and uneven. Blevins, the mercantile owner, rose halfway and then fully as if the weight of standing had doubled. I cut her credit while selling whiskey tabs to men who owed me months. That was cowardice on my part, not hers. The blacksmith, big hands clenched around his hat brim, said to the floorboards, "I shoved her at the well." He swallowed. I asked pardon. One by one, people spoke. Not pretty confessions. Plain ones. A ranch hand admitted painting the saloon's C sign. 2 boys admitted egging the barn. Mrs. Pike, eyes rimmed raw from grieving Ruthie, whispered, "I called her fear-faithless," and then sat hard before her knees gave way. Bell spoke last because nobody wanted to hear him and everybody needed to. "I carried ledger pages to killers," he said, voice thin. "Ritter told me the gang would spare the bank if I cooperated. I believed him because I was afraid of being poor, more than I was afraid of being damned." He turned to Angela, weeping openly now. "I wrote 'No resistance expected' beside your name." Angela did not rescue him from his sentence. She let his words stay in the room where they belonged. Marshal Tuck read charges against Ritter and Bell and the Outlaws, then had deputies remove the prisoners while the town watched. The scout captain paused at the door, looked back at Angela and gave a small, crooked nod that might have been hatred or respect. Then he was gone. After the irons clinked out of earshot, Councilman Drake, newly acting, old enough to know better, cleared his throat and held up a paper. "By vote of emergency, Council," he said, "we offer Angela West compensation for losses incurred in defense operations, $200, title to the unused north parcel by the rail spur, and appointment as official town defense captain with stipend." A rustle went through the church, some relief, some anticipation. People liked formal gratitude because it felt like settling a ledger. Before Angela could answer, 3 men stood and left their bench, Rancher Granger among them, the same who had laughed first at the ditch plan. They walked to her in awkward unison, carrying tools, scraper, hammer, pry bar. "We got one thing to do first," Granger said. She followed them outside without speaking. Half the town trailed into the damp night. At her barn, lamplight found the blackened sea still scorched into the pine. Granger set the scraper edge to char and pushed. Resin dust curled away. The blacksmith took over with careful blows, lifting the burned layer plank thin. Blevins held the lamp. Tomas braced the board. Nobody joked. Nobody looked away. When the letter was gone, it left a shallow scar in the wood, pale and raw against weathered boards. "Can't unburn it," Granger said quietly, "but it don't name you anymore." He stepped back and handed Angela the scraper handle first, an offered tool, not a demand. She took it, ran her thumb over the worn wood, and nodded once. Back in the church, people waited for her answer to the council's offer. Angela stood in the aisle with mud still on her hem and said, "I will not be your captain." A few faces fell, startled. "I am not refusing work," she continued. "I am refusing your old shape of work. One hero in front, everyone else clapping behind. That shape nearly killed you." She set the scraper on the front pew and rested both hands on it. "Keep your title. Keep your parade words. If you want to pay me, then pay for things that still matter when brave men are asleep." She counted on her fingers. First, a communal storm cellar, stone-lined, big enough for all families with 2 exits and air shafts screened for embers. Second, a shared grain store with rotating stock, locked by 3 keys held by 3 different households, at least one key always in a woman's hand. Third, a watch and training rota that includes women, immigrants, laborers, boys old enough to carry water, girls old enough to read a map. Not because they are spare bodies, because they are your town. She looked toward Pritchard. Sheriff keeps law. Watch keeps readiness. They are partners, not rivals. She turned to the benches where children sat pressed against mothers' skirts. No more teaching children that loud equals strong. Teach them where the safe lane is. Teach them how to boil water and tie a pressure bandage and listen to wind. Then, softer, preparedness is not fear. Preparedness is how neighbors promise each other tomorrow. The church stayed quiet long enough for rain to start again on the roof, gentle this time. Then Reverend Pike said, "Amen," not as ritual but agreement. Hands rose all over the room. Not unanimous, nothing honest ever is, but overwhelming. The vote passed before midnight. The money was reassigned by line item, not ceremony. Land parcel deeded to the town trust, not to Angela personally. 3-key system written into council minutes in ink that would outlast excuses. Angela accepted $20 only for replacement planks and mule shoes, and told Drake to write the amount where everyone could read it. On a cold morning in November 1888, with frost silvering the ditch edges, the first stones for the communal cellar went in. Mateo set corner blocks. Halberd, one-armed and stubborn, supervised roof beam placement, like a battlefield engineer. Mrs. Cobb ran food for crews and inventoried sacks with a sharper pencil than any banker's clerk. Elsie Pike, sleeves rolled, painted symbols on crate lids. Water, grain, medical, powder, clear, standardized, no guessing and smoke. At Angela's insistence, every household took one training night each month. At first, men grumbled when paired with laundresses at firing drill, when told by a shepherd boy where to stand in crosswind, when corrected by a Czech seamstress on knot tension for haul lines. Grumbling faded when drills worked. In spring 1889, children learned chalk marks before catechism. Circle for safe lane, slash for hazard, 2 dots for water cache. They practiced by lamplight in alleys while mothers timed them and fathers carried dummy stretchers through mud. In 1891, when a lightning fire took the rail warehouse roof, the bucket lines formed in under 3 minutes. Latrine trenches were cut uphill from wells without argument, and no one waited for permission to save one another. Losses were timber and freight only. In 1893, another monsoon slammed the valley at dusk, harder than the one that had nearly broken them. The church bell rang slow and uneven, same signal as before, but this time nobody froze. Families moved by plan. Watch teams opened diversion gates. Children counted lantern flashes aloud as they ran to assigned stations. By dawn, fences were down and fields were mud, but no bodies lay under tarps. Years passed. Names changed on storefronts. The Lucky Strike rebuilt and burned and rebuilt again under different owners. The rail spur brought more people than anyone could count right, and took some away just as fast. But some habits held. The old saloon joke jar labeled Coward Fund disappeared. In its place, by the mercantile door, hung a cedar box marked Preparedness Levy, where each payday folk dropped coins for communal stores. Sometimes only pennies. Always something. Sheriff Pritchard kept his badge another decade. He never again posted men to be seen. When new deputies arrived with swagger, he walked them to the feedlot choke, pointed at the grade cuts still visible after rain, and said, "Town was saved there by people I used to underestimate. Learned faster than I did." Bell served his sentence and returned years later quieter, thinner, spectacles replaced with wire frames. No one invited him to lead anything. Angela gave him work anyway, copying weather logs and ration counts where accuracy mattered more than reputation. Trust came in inches, not declarations. Ritter was convicted in territorial court and died in Yuma prison, cursing everyone but himself to the last report. The scout captain was hanged by lawful order in Prescott after trial for murder and robbery. Red Clay sent no rope, no vigilante letters. Law, however imperfect, had been chosen and kept. When Angela's hair went fully white and her hands stiffened in winter, she stopped digging but not teaching. On summer evenings, she sat on the rebuilt barn step, no brand, just weathered pine, and quizzed children as they passed. What does 2 dots mean? Water cache. Where is high ground from schoolhouse? Behind Hensley lot, then east fence. What do you do first when rain smells like metal? Tell someone, then move, then boil water. She nodded and handed out slices of rye bread as if they were medals. In 1912, Arizona became a state. Red Clay held a parade with brass horns and flags, dust everywhere. Near the end, not on the lead float but walking with steady gait, came the preparedness watch. Ranch wives, rail hands, schoolgirls, ditch crew veterans, 2 deputies, 1 pastor, and a boy carrying a sign painted by Elsie, now grown, now schoolteacher. Quiet work saves lives. Old men on porches removed hats as they passed. Long after Angela West was buried on a low rise above her fields, people still told children about the year of the branded C. They told it wrong sometimes at first, how a coward became brave, until someone older corrected them. No, they would say, tapping the table for emphasis. She was brave the whole time. We were the fools. And when summer clouds stacked green-black over the western ridge, Red Clay Crossing did not mistake luck for strength anymore. Gates were checked, barrels were counted, chalk marks renewed, hands moved before panic found a name. That was her legacy, not a statue, not a title, but a town that learned to prepare together and lived.